Wolves have an alpha. That's just what everyone assumes. Some unstoppable fighter who clawed its way to the top, who runs things through fear, who the rest of the pack falls in line behind because nobody wants to challenge it. Thing is, the guy who came up with that idea spent decades trying to walk it back. What's actually going on inside a wolf pack, and what happens when the wolf at the top dies, barely resembles the story most of us grew up with. So where did the alpha idea actually come from? Back in the 1940s, a Swiss researcher named Rudolf Schenkel was watching a group of wolves at a zoo. These wolves weren't related. They hadn't chosen to be together. They were strangers, dumped into the same enclosure by humans with no way to leave and nowhere to go. And what he saw was fighting. Dominance displays. A pecking order that formed through aggression. Basically what you'd expect if you locked a bunch of unrelated humans in one room with no exit. He called the wolf on top the alpha, the one under it beta, the bottom one omega. Catchy names. Almost completely wrong for how wolves actually live. Then in 1970, a biologist named L. David Mech wrote a hugely influential book, The Wolf, Ecology and Behavior of an Endangered Species, using Schenkel's same terms. It became one of the most cited books in wolf biology, and the alpha wolf idea took off everywhere. Nature documentaries, business seminars, casual conversation about dominant personalities. Nobody really questioned it for decades. Nobody had watched wolves the way Mech was about to. He ended up spending 13 summers on Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic watching a totally wild wolf population. No cage, no forced scarcity, no humans deciding who has to share territory with who. And what he found didn't match the captive version at all. Wild packs aren't a bunch of unrelated rivals fighting for rank. They're families, a breeding pair and their own kids, usually 6 to 10 animals, structured kind of like a household. The wolves at the top hadn't fought their way there. They were just the parents. The younger wolves deferred to them the way kids defer to their parents. Not out of fear. That's just how a family works. Like a teenager going along with a move across the country instead of staging a revolt over it. In 1999, Mech officially retired the term alpha from wild wolves, publishing a paper titled Alpha Status, Dominance, and Division of Labor in Wolf Packs. He spent most of the next 2 decades giving interviews, writing corrections, fixing textbooks that were still using his own outdated language. By 2022, the 1970 book that started the whole thing was out of print, partly because of the very idea it had helped spread, which changes everything about what happens when a pack loses its leader. It's not a succession battle. There's no fight for the throne because there was never a throne, just 2 parents and some kids who hadn't left home yet. What actually happens when one of them dies depends a lot on how it happened and who's left. Kira Cassidy from the Yellowstone Wolf Project led a multi-year study, published in Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment, that pulled together over 2 decades of data from 5 national parks: Yellowstone, Denali, Voyageurs, Grand Teton, and others. They looked specifically at what happens after a pack member is killed by humans: hunting, vehicle strikes, poaching outside the park boundary. One thing researchers are careful about here, this is specifically about those sudden human-caused deaths, losses the pack had no warning for. What happens when a leader dies of old age, more gradually, hasn't really been studied the same way yet. Cassidy's flagged that as an open question. It seems like the destabilization has at least something to do with how sudden and unpredictable the loss is, not just the loss itself. One of the clearest examples is the Slough Creek pack in Yellowstone. Starting just after the pack's male wolf was killed in a car accident, the pack's membership dropped from about 17 to just 3 members over the next 18 months. The pack never came back from it. The pack members scattered, more died, and eventually the pack completely disintegrated. Later, another pack of wolves came and took over the area, and the numbers back up exactly what happened to Slough Creek. When the wolf killed was just a regular pack member, the pack's odds of staying together the next year dropped 27% compared to packs that didn't lose anyone that year. When it was one of the breeding pair, basically the parents, the odds of staying together dropped 71%. The odds of successfully reproducing the next year dropped 49%. Cassidy put it simply: losing a leader is worse than losing anyone else in the pack. So what happens when a pack does survive losing a leader? It depends on what's left. Sometimes an adult offspring who stuck around past the usual 2 years, sometimes called a beta, steps into the breeding role alongside the surviving parent. Sometimes that same wolf just leaves anyway, finds a mate and starts its own pack somewhere else, which is the normal pattern for young wolves regardless of whether a parent died. And sometimes a completely unrelated wolf, off on its own from another pack, finds the opening and joins up, becoming the new breeding partner and starting the whole family structure over. None of this looks like a coup. None of it looks like the captive hierarchy Schenkel wrote up 80 years ago. There's no fight over the position because the position was never a prize. It was a role inside a family. When a family loses the wolf holding that role, what happens next looks a lot more like what happens to any household that loses a parent out of nowhere than anything resembling a battle for the crown. Grief isn't really the word researchers use. It implies an inner emotional state they can't actually measure. But disruption works. Reorganization works. And sometimes, like with Slough Creek, collapse is the right word too. The wolf everyone spent 50 years calling an alpha never earned that title by fighting for it. It earned it by having pups, feeding them, leading the hunts that kept everyone alive. Somewhere in Yellowstone right now, there's a wolf doing exactly that. Not ruling anything, just getting its kids through another winter.